So hello everybody, I think we're going to start. We'll get through the introductions and then we'll get into the webinar. So I think from reading the description you know it's about uncleared margin. Speaking today is myself, I'm Bill Hodgson from the OTC space. Many of you have come across me before. And our guest speakers today include Robin Moody, who is head of the SmartDX business and has worldwide responsibility for the SmartDX capital market solution. But Robin's been on webinars before. He's going to talk about the legal side of things and repapering. Now we then have Lee McCormack, who has a history of working around the markets, both at clearinghouses, banks and software companies now. Lee is going to give us a perspective on how to implement margin agreements and how to make that work. And then, to keep everybody honest, we got Ricky Maloney, who is probably the world's most popular presenter at conferences and panels. But Ricky is now at Old Mutual Global Investors after a time at Deutsche Börse and who was it before the Ignis Investment Management. So Ricky's bringing a sort of real world perspective about repapering and margin implementation. What we're trying to cover here in a practical sense is, firstly, what do you have to do to get compliant? Most of you may know some of that, but it's worth recapping, I think, as we go through. You know, you have to, I don't know, Robin, you can cover some of that between us, you know, the new margin agreements you have to have in place. We're going to talk a bit about the practical side of things, which is the fact that many people use Word and email and Excel for some of these tasks, which we want to offer an alternative for because I think there are good reasons not to use them. In terms of this webinar, we're going to go from the legal side, the repapering, so how to get that done. And we've got the results of our survey, which has been running now for quite a few weeks. And we think we've got a fairly reasonable set of data back telling us what people are up to. And then as we move down the webinar, we're going to get into implementing margin agreements. So how do you get from a written margin agreement into something that works on a day-to-day basis? And Ricky's going to chip in where necessary with real-world feedback. For anybody who doesn't know, the last time we did OTC Space did a webinar was with Axiom, and we sort of looked back at the slides then, and nothing really has changed. Pretty much every jurisdiction requires you to be compliant by September the 1st. We're in what's called a grace period or forbearance by whichever regulator you choose, but in effect they said we'll wait a while. After you get to September the 1st, there is no more letting people off. If you're obliged to be compliant and you're found not to be, then who knows what the consequences are, but that's the date to head for. So we're going to have a poll because we just want to find out where you all are. So I can see people voting. We just need to give it a minute because that gives us a flavour now, because at the ISDA AGM in Lisbon, there was a chart that I don't understand that seems to suggest either there's 80% complete or 40% complete. I don't know if you figured out, Robin.
Yeah, so I think the chart that went up there from at the ISDA AGM was basically done, at that point. So that's talking about at the end of April, I think it was. There was roughly 80% of agreements that were now signed, but only 40% I think had now been actually sort of processed and actually sort of operationalised and put into collateral management systems. I think that was the way that the message was kind of pushed across. I mean, the interesting thing obviously there is, you know, just how many agreements went down that bilateral route rather than sort of through the ISDA amend process.
A quarter of people saying they're compliant. We've got another quarter saying they're getting close, and then the spread, everybody else is sort of somewhere in between, which is interesting. So there's still, where are we, May, June, there's still, you know, not that long left for 3/4 of people to get compliant.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that stands out there is obviously looking at September 1st as a deadline. I think it's, you know, with obviously that's with the 6-month delay. So things have definitely progressed since you got 16th of the 1st of March. I mean, since March things have definitely moved on. But to see that 75% of people on the pot who's responded, you know, still haven't completed, does still mean there's lots of work for the lawyers to be doing.
We did a survey, which has been running on SurveyMonkey for quite a while, and for those of you who filled in data, we're very grateful because it helped us understand what's going on. So you can see that on the survey, that's not this webinar now, but on the survey we had roughly 40% were buy-side firms, a third were sell-side, and the rest were others, as it were. And we also asked people approximately how many agreements they got active, and I mean, over a third are up to 99 agreements, so they're relatively small firms, small portfolios, but I mean, 99 agreements is not trivial. Because I can remember running a team with 100 agreements, and it was not a minor task. And then we have got another quarter of firms who've got over 1,000 agreements, so that's a much more major. So I guess you've got small buy-side, big sell-side firms, and some in the middle. So at least for me, that says the people who responded to our survey are not bit part players. These are actual people with serious implementation things to do. So you carry on. So I think then Robin is going to talk a bit about repapering, using the survey results, which you can talk about if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I think the survey results were really interesting. I think if you'd asked most people sort of 18 months ago to a year ago in terms of the approaches to how these documents would be repapered, a lot of people were thinking that most things would go down the use to amend route, and there would be you'd run the protocol process to get through this, and that's how you'd meet the deadlines. But I think what actually happened during the process was that it was a complete flip. I think people were expecting sort of 80% of stuff to go down the protocol, and it actually ended up that sort of closer to 80% went down a bilateral route, and as a result, that then just had a sheer knock-on effect to the whole industry in terms of being able to have the number of bodies and people to get the documents in place. And if you look at the stats, the results from the survey, I mean, most people without question were using in-house negotiation, and there's only so big that those teams are. There's only so many ISDA lawyers out there in the community that are able to negotiate these documents. And then when you sort of boil that down to the individual organisations and try and look at just how many people within a firm, and in particular within the buy-side organisations, just how many people they could throw at this process. It literally is a sort of very small pipe, and hence the delays, and hence the reason why we were so late and missing the deadline really. The other thing I think that from feedback that we hear from the community is that I think the general feedback was that people were expecting the dealers to be issuing the documentation and for the buy side to be receiving the documents and negotiating on those dealer-led templates. But what we actually found during the process was that there were an awful lot of buy side firms that had prepped their own templates and were insisting on their clients for negotiating on the sheer bandwidth around the people, but then also the shift from the buy side then issuing the documentation to the dealers and looking at using their templates for the documentation meant that the playbooks that the dealers had built out meant that the process that they had prepped to follow really had to change, and they had to be very dynamic in their thinking and the way that and the tools they were using in order to process those documents and get those documents turned around and back to their counterparties quickly.
Yes.
Yeah, so in terms of exactly that, so I mean, if you look at I think the big surprise, like I said at the beginning, was the real low number around the ISDA amend service, and the fact that a year to 18 months ago, people were expecting sort of 80% of the volume to be pushed through the ISDA amend process and managed via a protocol. But what ended up happening was the complete reverse of that, and sort of 80% of the negotiations ended up being down a bilateral route and managing the documentation in a good old-fashioned Word process via email, receiving a document in, making changes and sending it back.
Sorry, right. So we've got a second poll for you, which is specific to how you go about repapering, because in our survey and in talking to people, we've been thinking about, well, if you've got a lot of this documentation to do, even if it's only 99, that's quite a lot of renegotiation or repapering. So we put a poll on the screen to really get the feedback from people on what actually are they using, because certainly in my experience anyway, Word and email has been the default choice. But of course, there are ways of doing it that are more helpful than that, but we're interested to know. So if you can look at your computer screen and vote on the poll, it'd be very handy. Do you know, Ricky, what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, so I was just thinking back to that previous survey there. I wonder whether that's caused by legacy ISDA CSAs, for example. I mean, we went through the ISDA amend process, but our ISDAs are always structured as umbrella agreements with each swap counterparty. So we trade with 16 swap brokers, and the agreement is identical with each of them. So the ISDA amend process worked for us, but I imagine if you're at a very large firm with hundreds of pre-existing ISDAs and CSAs that you need to adjust, then if you have different requirements within your own ISDAs, your own CSAs, then that's obviously going to take some bilateral negotiation with the banks. I mean, there were one or two that did sneak in a couple of changes, such as interest rate floors, for example, busting through those. So we had to negotiate those bilaterally, but in the main, we used the remainder. I'm quite surprised to see it was such a low number.
So we're just looking at the survey results, and it's actually sort of what I expected, is that most people are using Word and email.
Yeah. And that bilateral piece is without question the bit that we hear the most of, in the sense that there was a real opportunity for the industry to sort of adopt a better process around its documentation, and for whatever reason the industry chose to stick with its traditional ways. And if it couldn't go down the protocol, exactly as you mentioned, Ricky, if it couldn't go down the protocol route, people were still sending out Word documents, still managing the back and forth on those documents via their emails. And then having a great big Excel spreadsheet to track and monitor where those documents had got to in terms of getting them into place. And I mean, if you think about it in today's world, I mean, we used the word at our user conference a couple of weeks ago. I mean, that's just bonkers. I mean, think about the amount of technology that there is out there that you use in your home lives and your personal lives day to day. But yet, when it comes to negotiating your ISDA documentation, you still do the same thing you did 20 years ago, which is to copy and paste some text into a Word document and attach it and press send.
So it's unavoidable that this webinar is partly to do with suggesting alternative ways of doing things. So the fact that everybody uses Word and email, when in fact we all know from our personal lives that web-based technology has moved on a long way. So, I mean, the next slide is also a bit of survey feedback about where people find it difficult to get work done. So again, Robin, we're setting up SmartDX to talk about their platform. It's unavoidable, right? I mean, that's the point of the webinar. But we did want to point out that using Word, even I know it, to actually get through a lot of work and then use email to track work is really hard, especially when we're all busy. So the point of SmartDX is that it is web-based, it is organised stuff. And this survey slide showing where people find trouble supports the point.
I was a little bit worried that we'd come across a little bit of salesy on this webinar, but you've just done a sales pitch for us, Bill. So thank you very much.
But I'm being honest about the thing, because
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, in terms of smart, I mean, if you look at the survey results, right, for the purpose of the webinar, if we, forget about SmartDX for a second and look at the survey results, and the areas of which are causing frustration and delays and bottlenecks to the process. All of these things, or pretty much all of these things, are things that are being driven out of the document format that's being used. So and in terms of managing workflow around that, both internally and externally, in terms of agreeing the policies and clauses and your playbook around the negotiation process. All of these things are fundamentally driven out of the fact that the industry is addicted to Word and will continue to use Word as a way of creating and negotiating its documentation. When there are large repapering exercises that go on, like we've just seen, there is an opportunity for the industry to come away from its addiction and to use a platform for that. What that allows you to do is to sort of look at managing exactly those pieces which are up there in terms of your problem areas. Really, it's giving the transparency to your front office so that you can see where the documents are at any given point. Trying to define and adhere to the policies that and playbook that your negotiators are allowed to do, because as soon as you have a Word document that you're using to manage the back and forth on any negotiation, there is no control, so your drafters are able to make manual changes to whatever's going on with the document. And then lastly, in terms of getting that data in and out from your counterparties, we had a wonderful example from one of our dealer clients last week or a couple of weeks ago, sorry, that are now employing 50 people worldwide to rekey data from their renegotiated CSAs into their downstream systems. Now, I can pretty much guarantee those 50 people didn't go to university to come out of that university to go and work for this tier 1 organisation to then read documents and rekey data in systems. I can pretty much guarantee they don't want to do that job. The organisation doesn't want them doing that job, and there's an awful lot of risk associated to it. So, there is a fundamentally different and better way of doing it. It's not that technology isn't there. It's just that the industry, for whatever cultural reason, is being very slow to adopt that.
Mr. Ricky,
Mr. Ricky.
I have to say, in my experience of working with the legal people, they use Word and Excel, and we did rekey data from the legal document into the collateral management system because there was no alternative. But what's happening at your firm? What have you seen?
Well, so we did the ISDA amend. We are proud users of the CloudMargin service, which works very well, and we look forward to, kind of making things as easy for ourselves as we can. I mean, I came from a panel this morning in which we discussed Brexit, and it's quite likely that we may well have to, with those 16 swap counterparties that I mentioned, repaper with them for maybe a UK, European entity. That's not something I would particularly like our lawyer to do via Word. There's also, I mean, it's relevant-ish, I guess. There's also the ring fencing act that comes into play in 2018. So you've got the 5 main UK banks sort of ring fencing their investment bank, or the non-ring fence piece. That again is going to be a separate legal entity. Now, one of the banks has said to me that there won't be a repapering exercise, but I'm not entirely sure that is the case. And B, the other 4 banks haven't said a word about that. So there again, we may have a repapering exercise to undertake. And it makes sense to me that if I can get that done by somebody else in one place, then and I can track that, electronically, then I would propose that's the way we would prefer to go.
In the graph, in the chart from the survey, the top 3 things that people said were a hassle one was dealing with counterparties, which I assume is the margin call or receive flow. And there was also internal teamwork and flow negotiation. So that means, because the tricky part is, it's all very well saying you need to renegotiate a CSA, but if the 2 parties can't agree on the terms or the approach, then you've got to involve the front office and potentially the collateral team and the funding team. It starts to get tricky. And also, it's dealing with the front office was a high thing as well. Because I know that you've explained to me before the way in which your platform can actually handle that process by offering templates to the front office, which they fill in and send back.
Yeah, I mean, well, just even to go a level up there from your description. I mean, how many times do you have to chase around your organisation in terms of picking up the phone to speak to different departments and different areas to kind of say, where is this document with this particular counterparty? Who's got the next task on it? Has credit approved it? Has risk approved it? Has legal approved it, etc.? And where is that document? And then you multiply that out across your internal organisation and then externally as well, who your counterparty is doing exactly the same process and going through the same thing. And then multiply that at scale, like the industry have just done. That's where your bottlenecks come in. That's where your inefficiencies come in, because stuff just falls through the cracks. Just stuff just gets lost.
So we've had a question, which is interesting, from a viewer, and Gerard Raffi is asking, is there a standard process for repapering which you could use for bulk CSAs? Was that the ISDA amend protocol?
Yeah, well, I think the ISDA amend protocol is there for when a protocol-based approach can be used for putting new documentation in place. So if you can elect and stick to a standard set of clauses, then and standard set of elections, then yes, there is a process that can be used, and that's the ISDA amend service, which works wonderfully well when there is that when you can use the standards and when you're happy with those standards. Where it starts to get a little bit fuzzy is when if there's any bilateral negotiation, and that's oddly enough the SmartDX sales pitch is that we are a service for providing that standard on that bilateral negotiation, basically.
There's often with any ISDA protocol, there's often rightly or wrongly a suspicion that they're weighted more towards the sell side in favourable terms. So. That's that may reflect the fact that only 5% of respondents went down that route.
Okay. Was there anything else you wanted to get over in this part? Because I think we're going to begin to move towards implementation.
Yeah, no, I mean you have one more slide that was up there, which just showed a screenshot that allowed us to talk to it. But I think we've kind of covered this piece off. I mean, like the big message that we want to make sure comes across from the webinar from a SmartDX point of view, and also from the feedback we hear from the industry, is that fundamentally that Word document format is what's causing the industry to miss its deadlines. It's what's causing the industry to be slow in operationalising the collateral agreements that you've just repapered. And if the industry is able to sort of open its perspective and look at other document formats that you can use to repaper your documentation, and sort of change the way you do things, that's where you'll get the ability to be able to meet these regulatory requirements without having to take on more people.
We're going to be doing I'm not sure we agreed on the title of it, but a guidebook or a top tips between us. Although we're trying to express some of these points here, we're going to write down what we think you should be doing to get compliant, which is partly how to organise your teams, how to prioritise, how to get your agreements together, how to load them up, and so on. And so we've got that in progress, and we're going to use any of the discussion in this webinar, some of the questions, and our combined knowledge to put that guide together, which we will send to you guys after this event, which becomes something more practical and useful for you guys. So it's a more considered expression, and it won't go. We've been talking about repapering, so Lee's going to do some talking because we're going to get into the operational side of things. So if you want to move on to the next slide. So we got another survey for you. The answer is 1/3 of people using Excel, 1/3 are using in-house software, and then a smaller proportion are using external software and or something else. So it's interesting that a high proportion of people are using Excel, and I know from personal experience that this isn't really the right way to run a collateral management program, especially if you've got 99 agreements or more.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and it's something that we see quite often. So there are pitfalls and dangers of using Excel. It might be cheap in terms of money, but it's very expensive in terms of maintenance, expensive in terms of the amount of time and effort you put into running those agreements. And what we see, there's a high amount of operational risk. There's chances of fat fingers. You have to rekey things from your Excel system into an email if you're making a margin call out to your counterparties. It's just it's a short-sighted way, really, of running a collateral management process. And it's a shame we don't have any historic data on this poll, because I think it'd be quite interesting to see the shift in time of people moving off in-house systems or off Excel onto a more robust and purpose-built collateral management system. Just because, as we all know, and one of the reasons why we're having lots of discussions and webinars around collateral management at the moment, is the regulations for the Uncleared margin rules, which were in March, and then they got pushed out to September. That's pushing a lot of people into reviewing their collateral management processes.
So in the survey results, can you see those on your screen? In the survey results, there was a high proportion of buy-side people who said we're intending to change our approach. Because the fact is, you can put some simple exposure calculations in Excel saying if the raw exposure is X minus threshold Y minus minimum transfer, this is the result. But behind all that, and I know from building this, that keeping on top of the quality of your data coming in, the valuations and how stale they are already missing, and then making sure that in fact tracking of the assets in and out and the interest calculations, it becomes a significant task. And that it really isn't multi-tab Excel. It's not a workbook, because that's not even multi-user.
Oh, absolutely, but it can be done. I mean, I'm not saying it's clearly people are using it to do that. It can be done. However, it's not the future, and it's not efficient. What we see is that our clients that use our platform, for example, the feedback that we get quite often from them is that they really love using CloudMargin, because then it frees up their time to do other stuff. It's all there when they come in and they log in first thing in the morning. It's automated, so they can see that their margin calls that they need to make. They can even automate those margin calls and send them out to their counterparties automatically, and then just wait for the results for their counterparties to get into the office. So it saves people an awful lot of time in a robust and controlled platform and environment where the collateral management is being managed as a proper process rather than something that's hacked together.
So Ricky, in your experience of setting up a collateral management function, have you seen this happen where people have to go out and find a platform, get it, test it, implemented? Have you seen all of that?
Yeah, at Ignis years ago, I think I spoke to 12 firms so we had an outsourced collateral management function, and we we wanted to bring it in-house. So it was basically the whole, RFI process, going around looking at all of the offerings, and utilising what was at the time the best offering. Running collateral management agreements on Excel is okay if you don't have too many counterparties and too many variations in your CSAs. But it makes perfect sense to me to get as much of that in the digital world, if you like, as possible. I mean, simple changes from cash to bonds, for example. If you've got that across multiple counterparties, multiple tabs on an Excel workbook, that takes a lot to implement. You've got the operational risk element, whereas if that can be done electronically and can be tracked at any point in time by multiple users, then to me that seems to be the way to go.
And Ricky, what were the key criteria that you were looking for when you were running that process? What was important to you as a user within that collateral management vendor selection?
Well, cost being one of them. I mean, the idea at the time was we had three because of legacy businesses. We had three separate collateral managers, and the idea was to centralise that internally, and look to build, because if you think back 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was talk of a collateral fund, wasn't there? If you optimise your collateral to the extent it can give you an advantage over your peers, that was what we were looking for. So cost and ease of use, and if I can come in the morning and most of the work has been done for us, so that all we're left with are the calls, if you like, and within or without a certain tolerance, they're auto paid. Outside of a certain tolerance, then we would have a couple of people look at those. But it was about automation, ease of use, and cost, basically.
So you've actually got another slide from the survey which talks about what is it that takes people's time, because again we can bang on about in our experience why Excel's a bad idea, but in fact if we go on to the next slide, which we have, you can see that our survey said that one of the key pinch points is setting up agreements on the system. And referring back to Robin's point, which was, I can remember doing this myself, we did go through a big onboarding process where we had to read every agreement very carefully and key it into the system and make sure it was right. And
that's exactly the reason why there is a strong partnership between CloudMargin and SmartDX, is that we're very similar best of breed using new technology companies to solve manual problems that people have. So in Robin's world, they're taking on the manual demons caused by using Word, and in our world, we're taking on the manual demons caused by Excel. And by working together, by being able to take the legal documentation information from SmartDX and being able to send it automatically into CloudMargin, then that saves people an awful lot of time and solves a real world problem.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's the time piece as well, which obviously is crucial to the slide and to the point that's being made here. But there's also the risk element as well, in terms of removing that human involved in extracting the data and putting it in and putting it downstream. Because you are not using Word and you're using an XML, a machine readable version of a document, it means that the data that's being fed into CloudMargin is 100% accurate. So that might not save you time. There's time to be saved in terms of getting that data in, but there's additional time to be saved and risk to be reduced by having that 100% accurate data that's flowing downstream.
And the other big time waster there we see is from the buy side. It's the calculation and the workflow. So working out what your exposures are to your various counterparties, and then making and/or receiving calls. That's absolutely core to what we do. We automate all of that. So as Ricky mentioned, a good collateral management system will allow you to send out your margin calls automatically before you've even got in the office, should you want to set it up that way. Or it can be set up where you might want to review each margin call before it's sent out, but it's sat there waiting to go for you. So an overnight process, whenever you do your trade valuations, get automatically sent into your collateral management system. And then when you log in first thing in the morning, you see which margin calls that you need to make on your counterparties in order to manage your credit risk and your exposure. And also you can see what margin calls your counterparties expect to make on you, so you can manage your funding and your liquidity risks as well.
So in terms of the body of the webinar, that's the sort of coverage of the legal side and implementation side. I think what we can do is move on to, if you go on another couple of slides, it's more or less saying to people, if you're of the people we saw earlier that are not compliant yet, quite a few are in progress, but quite a few are still getting there. And so I think it'd be useful for us to think about, well, what's our advice to people to get going if you're not moving quickly enough? Because the slide shows a few points, but I was looking at our prototype guide that we're going to send out, and from a legal point of view, it's all to do with prioritising and having a pipeline and a workflow. I don't know, Robin, what the best advice is, separate from which platform should you use, but in fact, if people aren't getting there quickly enough, what are the accelerators perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just need to look at the mechanisms where you can reach some of these deadlines. We were speaking before the webinar kicked off about some of the other regulatory requirements that are coming downstream. There's your legal teams are going to get tied up very, very, very quickly with looking at different regulatory requirements and different repaperings that have to take place over the next few years. I mean, it literally just keeps coming. So rather than just keep throwing people at the problem, if you can start to break the problem down, break the process down into things that can be automated, then that will, it really will position your firm in a much stronger way, so that at some point in the future, a regulator is going to come knocking on somebody's door and saying, what are you doing to put controls around your legal documents? What are you doing to reduce risk around these processes? And if your answer is, well, we've hired a load of lawyers and we're sending Word documents out via email, that's not the greatest of defence in that process. Whereas if your argument is we're using new technologies to help put around a new process that puts that audit trail, puts that control, puts that efficiency into our processes. I mean, that will give you a certain amount of protection and a certain amount of credibility with the regulators that you are taking this seriously, rather than we've just created a load more noise exactly the same way we've done this for the last 20 years, and we will continue to use Word documents to put our documents in place, and then use Excel to manage our collateral.
As I was drafting this guide, I realised that it's a moving target, because you can build a list of counterparties and prioritise who you should be repapering with, but of course your front office is going to invent new counterparties as you go along, and some relationships will go stale and some will become more active or revive, and so in fact you've got to keep doing this. And I figured that as a program you've got to have a sort of regular production line approach, which is to keep reviewing the priorities of what you should be doing, keep reviewing the workflow around the team to certainly get the repapering side of things done, in order that you can feed the finished agreements down.
Yeah, I mean, mentally as well, I think there needs to be a bit of a shift within the industry as well. I mean, historically, especially on the sell side, banks would just throw money at the problem, and these days you just build something in house. Whereas these days it's just not possible to do that. You need that there isn't the deep pockets that there have been within the industry, and to look to technologies that are providing OPEX type solutions to your business. It's just something that is a sensible approach for everybody to be looking at.
And from my point of view on the next steps is clearly, Robin's talked about the repapering exercise and the demands that places, but don't forget these new CSAs that you're putting in place will change your operational process forever. You are now making daily margin calls where you probably weren't before. You now have your FX derivatives in there where you didn't have before. You now have clearing also coming down the pipe if you're not already doing daily clearing. So the volume of margin calls has increased, we estimate, by around about 500%. So your existing processes, even if you did get by on Excel previously, by the time you've finished using SmartDX and repapering all your agreements, your operations guys are going to hate you. You're going to have a hell of a lot more processes going on. There's a significantly higher chance that you start missing things, and you actually can't throw more bodies at this because the quality of your data and the quality of your platform that you're using will not cope. So what we encourage people to do is to look at highly affordable, highly functional and quick to deploy solutions to manage this. It doesn't have to be done by the 1st of September, but what we've seen is a lot of our more sophisticated clients have started looking forwards and thinking about life after the repapering deadline and how that works. So we've been very busy with lots of clients who are trying to get prepared, but we are starting to hear more direct inquiries into us from clients who are where the operational side of the repapering is coming to the fore.
So assuming you're in this good place where you're compliant and you now have all these margin agreements, what it's going to generate is an economic change to your firm. And I remember from running collateral management, the fact that we had to fund these agreements, interest in and out or assets in and out, was seen as a sort of a secondary operational task. Nobody really cared actually, because they were making a lot of money. But I guess nowadays, the relationship between the collateral team and the funding desk, I don't know, Ricky, how important that is, but I figure that it must have some effect that people is tangible.
Yeah, I mean, we're currently exchanging cash, but the majority of our collateral is for an absolute return fund. So cash kind of makes sense. Our exposures aren't, long dated and directional realistically. But if you are that type of client, then, I guess you really do need to be looking at whether cash is the move or whether you should be repoing out some bonds and delivering that cash on. For us at this point in time, we kind of get away with it given the structure of the fund, but I expect as interest rates rise and perhaps value comes back into bonds, then that may well change. But it is an important consideration. You have to think about the performance drag of any collateral that you deliver. So you can extend that out further into looking at the sort of capital footprint with your swap counterparties that your business has. And I know that, Lee, you've been speaking with another company in respect of that. So to be able to analyse those numbers in one place is important as well. I mean, the banks have forever looked at the investment managers in terms of return on balance sheet, being one measure. What we're now looking to do is turn that around, and if we can sort of again digitalise that, then it makes perfect sense.
What we see in the demand from our clients is that first of all they need to become compliant, and once they're compliant, then they're looking for efficiency. They're looking for as Ricky says, using more different types of collateral, whether it just be cash or bonds. So we have a lot of demand from our clients to get into tri-party repo, and so can they send a message from CloudMargin down into their tri-party custodian and the settlement of the collateral movements. We're looking at working with the industry utilities, the global collateral MTU, for example, around the settlements. We're also getting a lot of our clients asking us to or interested in the functionality that we're developing around collateral optimization. So, what is the cheapest bond to deliver to meet those margin obligations? Taking in an automatic feed from your custodians of what your collateral balances and your collateral holdings actually are. So just to try and, traditionally the collateral management front to back, so once you've done a trade through to agreeing what the margin movements are through to settlement, has been a very fragmented process. And our mission here is to bring that all together in one-stop shop by creating connectivity out to the various platforms, both upstream and downstream, and also sideways into companies like SmartDX as well, just to make the whole process smoother.
So now is the time for listeners, if you've got questions you want us to answer, what are our top tips to actually get compliant? Now would be a good time to ask them because we're sort of wrapping up. Another consideration, assuming that everything's fine and dandy, you've done your repapering, you've got a collateral management platform and all of those problems are gone, and economically you've figured it out, is disputes. Because with the best will in the world, if either party has issues with their data or the valuations or some detail they didn't get right, it soon comes out that when they call you, you disagree. And I don't know if any of the three of you have got practical feedback about what is the level of disputes going on in the industry.
I have to be honest, I mean the majority of our derivatives are cleared anyway, so the CCP number is golden. If I may, the kind of the CCP valuing bilateral portfolios in terms of margin requirements to me would be a good thing. That would still link into you guys in terms of taking those numbers. That takes away a big problem for me because if I'm facing, as I say, 16 swap counterparties and we've got FX options and swaptions on, their 10-day VAR models differ, to a bank they differ, and I have a duty to kind of replicate those as best I can. That's tremendously challenging. So something along those lines would be of great help, and this kind of lends itself to, I guess, relieving yourself as many of these problems or burden as you can.
Yeah. Traditionally, what we see is the operations department, certainly at some of the sort of medium-sized asset managers, would do their collateral management process in the morning, and if that was on Excel, it'd take them most of the morning. And if things go well, that's great. If things go badly, then it takes the rest of the day as well in order to complete your collateral management process. But once they're using a system which is automated, their collateral management process can be over quite quickly, and then they can spend their time on other things. And so actually in the workflow, dispute management comes after you've done your collateral management. So it's best to get the money in and to manage your counterparty risk, and then if there's a dispute, then you sort it out after. So it's very important to understand what it is that's driving those disputes and have the data and the analysis and to be able to track them. So how long has a dispute been outstanding against a counterparty? There are going to be collateral pressures and capital pressures on aged disputes. So I think the industry is moving towards resolving them. I think disputes, certainly in the bilateral space, are commonplace. People's valuations and their curves are vastly different. Even if you've both got the same trade population, which is not necessarily always the case as well. So disputes are a feature of the collateral management space at the moment. But what people are doing operationally is that they're exchanging collateral to get 95% of the way there, and then after they've done that, then they'll solve for that 5%.
One of the questions I'm not sure we can answer is, has anybody come across an example of a target operating model for running your collateral management program? And by target operating model, we mean, in effect, an organizational design that covers the processes and the people, that says who does what and when and how. So it's partly workflow, partly responsibilities, and partly process. I don't know if you've seen that. I've heard of those things being designed, but I've not seen one published saying this is the right way. I've seen them done for specific organisations. I don't know what you guys have seen.
We've been part of those. So quite often we will get approached by a consultancy firm or a buy side or a client who is wanting to improve their collateral management process, and then we become part of their overall target operating model. So we're very much part of that process. Do we sit and design them? That's not what we do. But we're more than happy to put you in touch with some of the people that we've worked with that have helped design those.
Okay. Have you guys got any final points? Your top tip, single sentence tip for anybody?
Be operationally ready. Your processes will change forever, and we're seeing it a lot that people will struggle to cope with the demand for making margin calls on their existing systems.
I think the final thing for me is just for everybody to be aware that technology is out there. And if you think about the technologies that you use today in terms of, we use the example of our user groups. So many people, Uber has become the standard for booking your taxis and for kind of getting around now, and people use that every day, and it's become a piece of technology that the world has adopted. There are an awful lot of technologies out there that are already built that can help that can help you in your processes and can help you meet these regulatory deadlines. It's really just sort of broaden your horizons and take a look at those technologies that are out there, whether that's us or CloudMargin or whoever. But take a look at them and do that review, because there are better ways of doing business than to sort of keep doing the same thing you've done before.
It's more than one sentence. All right. So I think we've used up enough of your time. If people have general questions about, it doesn't have to be specific to the guys at CloudMargin or SmartDX, you can email me, Bill Hodgson, bill@theotcspace.com, or I can pass your questions on to the other guys, or in fact bring other people in. So if you have general problems and queries, please get in touch and we'll try and help. If you've got specific questions about the two platforms on offer today, we've got their contact details on the screen. Thank you for tuning in. I think we've said all we're going to say. Watch out for our next webinar sometime in the future. Thank you, everybody.